we can start this wonderful panel. So welcome to the panel discussion, AI for Grant Writing. My name is Mia, and I work at Instrumentl. So I talk to nonprofits and grant consultants to better understand their everyday challenges. I then take this feedback to our product team that then ensures that Instrumentl is continuously improved and that it serves the real needs of the users. I also have a nonprofit background, so I used to run my own organization for 3 years, and we had projects centered around cultural tourism, preserving cultural heritage, and fighting for social justice. So I will go through the agenda, then I will introduce our wonderful panelists, and we can take it from there. So the first thing that we will discuss is understanding AI and how it can be applied to accelerate your grant writing and help your organization. We will then discuss ethical considerations of AI in grant writing. We will talk about the role of grant professionals working with AI, and we will end with a Q&A section and closing remarks. So make sure to include hashtags in front of your questions when you post them in the Zoom chat so that I can spot them easier and address them at the very end. Also, be sure to stick until the sorry, Margit is asking me if I can check if people are able to get in. Okay, I can double check that.
I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought.
No, it's fine.
Your private message. I've just noticed it's been the same number of participants for almost 10 minutes, and that's usually a red flag that people are trying.
No, it's they're getting higher. At least I can see on my side, like it's now 192, 93, 94. So everything is going well. 95 now. Yeah. Probably a Zoom bug or something like that. So thank you for flagging it anyhow. So we are now at almost 200 participants and counting. Be sure to stick until the end for this special ChatGPT prompt guide that can help you leverage AI in grant writing. And without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. So with us are Dr. Bev Browning, also known as the Grant Doctor. She's the best-selling author of Grant Writing for Dummies. She's known for her consulting work in grant writing, RFP responses, technical writing, and organizational development. And thanks to her expertise, her clients have received more than 7,500 million in funding. So thank you, Dr. Bev, for joining us and for taking the time to share your expert insights. Next, we have Margit, who is the owner and founder of Grants for Good. She created this company in 2009 to help nonprofit organizations and businesses find and get grant funding. Margit is also one of only 400 nationally certified grant professionals and one of only 30 approved trainers in the US on this topic. Margit and her team have secured millions in grants for nonprofits and businesses. She is also well known for her amazing online course that's called All About Grant Writing. And also she has an on-demand webinar on the similar topics. So how to use ChatGPT and AI for fundraising. So make sure to check her website after this webinar. And at the very end, we have Steve, who is a manager at Next in Nonprofits. So he's, so to say, a nonprofit veteran with over 25 years of experience helping charities grow with new ideas in fundraising and communications. Steve has also selflessly shared his knowledge. So he presented over 100 learning sessions on topics such as crowdfunding, fundraising, infrastructure, and social media strategy for nonprofits. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining this panel as well. So to move on, let's start with understanding AI and its application to grant writing. And to start off, let's discuss some practical examples of how AI is currently being used in grant writing and fundraising. So maybe Margit, you can kick us off, and then Dr. Bev and Steve, feel free to jump in at any time and share your experience as well.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to kick us off. And I'm so happy to be here with someone who I've just met, Steve Boland, and Dr. Bev Browning, whom I've taken courses from way back when I started my own consulting firm. So it's great to be among this group, and I welcome everyone who's joining us today. If I could just take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about AI and how it works, and the reason why is I won't get into coding or those kind of tech details, but I want to give an overview of how it works, because only then can we understand how it's going to be useful to us in grant writing and fundraising. So just real quickly, one thing to remember, and many of you know this, some of you, this may be new, but ChatGPT was really just released openly from OpenAI back in November 2022 by the company called OpenAI. So there's been GPTs around for years, but ChatGPT came from OpenAI back in September of, I'm sorry, November of, someone's got their microphone on. If we could mute, please.
Yeah, can you please, ensure to mute your mic?
And then other companies, if they have the budget, will buy a table at our gala, which is the end of September.
We're having some difficulties here.
Yeah, you might be able to mute those mics.
Yeah. I will just unmute you now, Margit.
Okay.
Are you? Yeah.
I'm here. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, the important thing to remember about how ChatGPT works and all of these large language models is they're really focused on detecting patterns and probabilities. So they're trained with large amounts of data, which is why they're called large language models. And the model is operating on those patterns and determining the probability of what word comes next. So if I were to type in Mary had a little and left it blank, it would put in lamb, because that's a pretty obvious next word. And so keep in mind when you're doing prompts, when you're using these GPT engines, so to speak, they are really working on predicting what comes next. So they're not their own thinking device, we know that, but it's really a matter of prediction. So when you asked me to start off talking about some practical examples of how AI is currently being used in grant writing and fundraising, it can be used in so many different ways, but the prompt you enter is really critical for what quality of response you're going to receive. So for example, I could put in a prompt that says, very specifically, write me a thank you letter for a donation from the Mullins Foundation for $15,000 to the Arts and Culture Institute that was made on July 1st for a 12-month period, and make the letter less than 1 page or less than a certain amount of words. So the more specific you are with that prompt, the better the result you're going to get. So thank you letters are one application. My explanation really for this is, on the whole, it's helpful for developing a first draft of anything, but don't ever rely on it. The system is so imperfect at this point. It's so new. So you definitely have to edit. And I'll leave it there for others to chime in.
Great. Thank you so much, Margit, for sharing that. Yeah, definitely. We will discuss this a bit later as well. And we have some of this information as well in our AI guide, the ChatGPT prompt guide. So yeah, maybe Dr. Bev and Steve, you would like to add some examples of how AI is used, or share your experience, how you have been using it as well.
Dr. Bev, you're on mute right now.
Oh,
Okay, I've been using, can you hear me now?
yes. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I've been using it now for about maybe 4 months. I use ChatGPT Pro to design curriculum for new courses. But one of the things that I've noticed is that you have to articulate what you're asking it to do. The first time may not give you exactly what you're asking for. So when I'm looking for curriculum for negotiating skills for grant writing consultants, I'm asking for not just general negotiating, but how we negotiate our services, our skills, our contracts. So I had to learn that by articulating what I was asking it to do. I'm also using Beautiful AI, which is for PowerPoint design, and I'm experimenting with it every day. I love it. It's colorful. It has a lot of content. It also has an AI bot built into it, so you can just tell it what your topic is and who the audience is, and it creates these awesome slides that you can fine tune. Yesterday was the first time that I actually uploaded an existing PowerPoint file to see how it would convert it into smart slides. And it needed a little tweaking, but it's a work in progress, and I love it. And finally, the last piece of AI that I've been using for a while now is Super Normal Note Taker AI. And for every Zoom that's on my calendar, Super Normal takes both summary notes and a complete transcript of the entire conversation. Those things help me when I'm talking to potential clients, as well as when I need to go back and check notes before I generate a proposal for services or something like that. So I enjoy it. I've also used it to demonstrate with my students, my private cohorts that I do on Zoom that are live. And with that, I love to just plug in what their projects are and see what comes back. A practical example would be, don't take AI as is. Be investigative, check it, know that it's not totally up to date. It's probably 2 years behind on any relevant data. So anything that I use, I ask for websites and footnotes, which is amazing because now I can go out and check and then look for more up-to-date information to plug into whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, people in chat are asking for links, and we have other people answering, so that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's super helpful to learn about all these other tools besides ChatGPT. And yeah, we have some questions as well. We can address them a bit later. So maybe we can move on to the next question. Where do you see AI having the greatest impact in the field of grant writing? So maybe Steve, would you like to take this one to lead?
Yeah, I appreciate being offered the chance to come talk about this a little bit, because I'm when I talked with Will Yang from Instrumentl about this opportunity to share on this, I'm a little bit more skeptical, I think, than maybe some, for a few reasons on the ethics that we'll get into in a minute. But I do want to think about the impact that I'm a little concerned about right now is folks that maybe haven't been professional grant writers, that don't hire contractors, that don't do this stuff, feeling, well, now I can submit to everything. Now I can write every grant there is to write. And our partners in philanthropy are going to get a little swamped, much as the publishing industry has experienced. If you go take a look at what's happening over at Amazon right now, everyone is telling the machine to write a book, and they're submitting the books for publication, and cutting the wheat from the chaff is a little harder. So I think that our jobs as grant writers are going to shift a little bit when our relationship-based conversations are going to be raising those applications a little bit higher than those that are just coming in without any connection to the granting organizations, no conversations with program officers, none of that stuff, but just one after the other of it wasn't hard to fill this out because the machine did all the writing. So we got a whole bunch more coming in. And I think there is a concern that I have about the biggest impact is, as important as relationships relationships to granting officers have been in the past. I think having some connectivity to those folks to differentiate applications that maybe all start sounding alike or are too many of them is going to change the nature of how we get considered for first-time funding and applications moving forward.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that foundations are having issues now with evaluating different grant proposals, considering that ChatGPT is available to everyone. And yeah, if there isn't like a differentiating factor to those or something specific, then everybody can simply apply. Dr. Bev and Margit, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I would like to add to it. I appreciate the concerns Steve is bringing up, because there are so many cautions that we do have to be careful of as we explore this. But explore being the key is we need to be curious and explore, because it is not going away. I remember back in the early 90s, I was working for our county government. That's how I started writing grants. And I asked my boss, I said, could you send me this training all about the World Wide Web? Because I think it's going to be big. And fortunately, she agreed, and I got trained in the internet, and here we are now, right? So really, I feel like we really need to explore AI in terms of the impact it could have on our field as grant writers, as fundraising professionals. I do think it could be a time saver. I mean, I look at Instrumentl, and having been an Instrumentl subscriber for years now, it has saved me a ton of time doing funding searches that took me so many hours in the past. And I envision, various AI programs such as ChatGPT, such as the one that Dr. Bev mentioned. I think they're going to save us time. Frankly, they already have. But again, be cautious, because they aren't going to replace our own intellect. And I'm going to probably say this again throughout this webinar, is we are not grant writers. We are grant professionals. We do more than write. So while ChatGPT may help us write, maybe it'll save us time, maybe it'll get us through a writer's block, it is not replacing the decades of knowledge that we come to with a client. And so I could talk for hours about that, but I'm going to leave it at that. I think it's going to be a time saver.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective there. Yeah, I think like the next question is sort of like complementary to what you said. So how can AI be employed to find more suitable grant opportunities for nonprofits? Dr. Bev, would you like to address this? Have you used AI for this purpose, or have you relied only on Instrumentl in that sense?
I did use AI to test it, to see if in fact it could identify potential funding sources for a fairly elusive project, which was a for-profit business. And it did identify some legitimate resources, and I just moved it on to the person who was inquiring via email, because I don't work with for-profit businesses. And for all of you, I am now the grant writing training doctor, not the grant doctor. I stopped writing applications last year in the fall. 47 years gave me this gray hair, everybody. So I'm glad to depart and just do training. But yes, I believe that, for the odd things that we don't find in a massive database like Instrumentl with these fantastically quick algorithms, that you can use ChatGPT or any other preferred AI to find the elusive, to find the quickies. So I get a ton of emails every day, likely 50 to 100, and I can't just give away things. But if I'm not sure, or I want somebody else to do it for me, I go to ChatGPT and say, okay, is there any funding for for-profit businesses in the state of Minnesota that are working in this particular industry or SIC code? And it's amazing. I get information back immediately, copy it, drop it to the email, hit send, and move on.
Yeah, and it's good to mention that ChatGPT has been trained on that data up to September 2021, which means that, for instance, if you were to ask it about some information that happened after this period. So for instance, if you were to ask it, who is the current king of United Kingdom? So ChatGPT would reply, hey, I've been trained on data up to September 2021. According to my knowledge, it's Queen Elizabeth. So it's good to have this in mind about this knowledge cutoff that happened in 2021. Great, thank you so much, Dr. Bev, for sharing that. We can also discuss this last question from this section, which is about the challenges and limitations that you see in using AI in grant writing and fundraising. So we addressed some of it. So the knowledge cutoff, the fact that it cannot replace an actual human and the knowledge of a grant professional. But would any of you have anything to add here in terms of challenges and limitations?
Yeah, let me jump in quickly. I think one of the things that I've run into as I've tested the tool is that large language model bases probability on the quantity of data that it shows in a specific area. So if you are asking it for something that it has a tremendous amount of information about in one thing, that's going to be the spewed back answer to you. It's not going to try to get the nuance. So it is a limitation that then gives you to prompt to change the question, to go, no, I don't mean that. I mean, I know about that thing. So exclude this from the results and tell me more. And it's not a terribly difficult back and forth to do, but it is important to recognize that, you know, its first responses are going to be the most likely responses. And if what you already know is already in that first response thing, you're going to have to help it along by excluding some of the more traditional responses in order to surface the things that you might not have access to or might not have seen in other places. So I think that getting used to the iterative nature of refining the question, makes it much more useful. But that is a limitation of that you have to understand right away, that its first response is going to be the most likely response, which may not be the most helpful response.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah, I would also like to point out that interacting with ChatGPT, so you have to be, as like Steve said, you have to be prepared to engage in a conversation. So it's not like you just formulate a prompt and you get an answer and you copy paste it. It doesn't work like that, which also has something to do with ethical implications that we will discuss in a bit. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Margit, go ahead. Sorry.
Another challenge or limitation, and this is to really jump on what Steve was saying, to add to that, is the prompting is so important, and also checking for the truth of the response. The easiest thing you can do is, I asked ChatGPT, I said, what is Grants for Good? Well, I know the answer to that. It's my company that I started in 2004. And it gave a fairly accurate response based on probably from my website, but it said I was based in Massachusetts. And while I love Massachusetts, I'm not based there. I'm based in New York. So I don't know where it came up with that. And those are the kind of things that you don't want to trust. So whatever you receive for a response, always make sure it is accurate. The other really neat thing you can do, I'm going to give you a quick tip that's going to save you a lot of time. And I learned it because I've been so interested in this topic that I'm taking a course in prompt engineering, which is how to develop the best prompts. Nice. And one thing I just learned is that you can ask ChatGPT, you can say in your typing, you can say, from now on, tell me the best way or a different way to ask this question. So in other words, I might ask the question, why is the sky blue? And it may say, here's another way to ask that question. What causes the color of the sky to appear as blue to our eyes during the daytime? So it's helping you ask the question better. So you could try that little trick, because first try your own question, see how it works. Ask it to regenerate responses if you don't like the first one. And then you can copy and paste the best parts that you want to use. So I feel like the challenge or limitations, I think, yes, it's a time saver now. It's going to be more of a time saver in the future. But I wouldn't want people leaving with the impression that it's going to replace what they need to do. You still need to do your editing to sound authentically you. and to truly represent your organization and your work.
Yeah, I completely agree. Dr. Brev, do you have anything to add to this section, or should we move to the next one?
I don't have anything to add. Margit is excellent in providing sufficient detail.
Nice.
Thanks, Dr. Bev.
Okay. Yeah, so let's move on to ethical considerations of AI in grant writing. So we kind of touched upon this, but maybe we can zero in on discussing the ethical issues that we should be aware when implementing AI in grant writing. And just to pause for a second to comment on what Margit said. So yeah, like ChatGPT saying that your organization is from Massachusetts, that's the classic example of AI hallucination, which means that ChatGPT simply serves misinformation and doesn't provide you with an accurate data. So that's something to be wary of when using ChatGPT for grant writing, whether you use it for as a brainstorming partner or for just not to start from scratch when it comes to writing. So what other ethical issues should we be aware of? Steve, I feel like you can kick us off here, considering your skepticism towards AI.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that I'm concerned about is when we are asking it questions and trying to get information back out of it and trying to correct it. If we are loading our own client information, nonprofit information or whatnot in there, that becomes the property of the chatbot that you're using, ChatGPT, whatever. You're training their algorithm for them. You're giving them more information when you tell them that language assumption you made based on your existing model was wrong. Here's some language instead that we feel is more correct, which may be helpful, but other people are also in that same mode of trying to provide it with additional guidance that can shift what it understands as acceptable. And if you turn on the recording version of this thing where it knows you in a permanent state from one session to the next, it continues to try to give you the answers that it thinks you want to hear, not necessarily what is factual, as we've talked about earlier, but rather these are the things that provide the user response that I'm looking for in engagement. And I'm a little concerned about us going to a grant writing opportunity and saying, answer these 4 questions with 500 words each and these things and put it in. And then when it comes back not quite right, we start refining it for the machine, which then takes that information and incorporates it into its model to use for the next person and starts shifting the conversation based on what we did, while the same model is being adapted by somebody else. And I think that this has just got a real opportunity for more muddling. So when Margrit was talking about, how do we verify that what it's saying is true? The more specific we get and the more information we provide it and the more information it's gathering from other sources using it, the harder it's going to be to disambiguate what's a factual statement from what's a predictive model coming back at us. And I think we're being complicit in the system this way by giving it all this information and telling it things at the same time. That concerns me at this point. So I try not to use anything that might be viewed as proprietary when I'm putting the prompts together. I try not to share that information in without clients understanding what's going on. Right now, that's still useful to give it very generic information. But I do feel like there's a real tendency to say, well, yeah, but our population is 6,000 people that look like this. And then I want an answer that's that. And it's like, where are your 6,000 people? What do they need? How am I taking that information and using it for somebody else's purposes? We just don't know that yet. And that gives me pause.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Dr. Bev, do you have anything to share on this topic? I feel like, you've been a bit quiet.
Well, I just think that we have to take into account ethics and remember how we all got where we are. For those of us that have longevity in the grants industry, we got here because of our research skills, our thought leadership, our critical thinking, our judgment, our ethics, our creativity, our visioning, and none of that happens in a chatbot. It happens in our mind when we visualize something in front of us and we start typing. So ChatGPT can't visualize like the human mind because it's been programmed differently. And all we're going to get back is what I call black and white static. But we have to understand how to take that static and not, I just posted a note, don't make corrections or fine tune in ChatGPT. Always copy and paste what you have into Word, close out GPT, then make your fine tuning and update it. That way you're not giving what you want to have in this perfect grant application request or narrative back to the bot to use for the next person. So that is important. I always opt out, never do anything in there other than ask the question, copy the return, move it into Word, and then begin to fine tune it and customize it for whatever I'm writing. So we have to have common sense. We have to have innate suspicion in the clarity and validity of what we're getting back.
Yeah,
I'm
wonderful.
so glad you mentioned that about editing offline. I'm really glad you said that. That's a great reminder. Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like we're all on the same page when it comes to how to use AI in terms of the tool is only as good as its users. So AI isn't necessarily bad or good, but the way people use it will directly impact the consequences that it will have on grant writing profession. So when it comes to ethical issues, we also touched upon this a bit, but I'm curious to hear more about how using AI might unintentionally introduce bias into the grant writing process. So Steve, you mentioned that people using it is actually training the language learning model. So do you want to expand on it, or do you think that we covered the gist of it already?
Well, a slightly different area of the bias piece, I think that we may be unaware of when we're using the tool that is important is understanding some of the data sets that may or may not be available. And of course, this is proprietary information and we don't know everything. There are places where OpenAI is choosing not to do business because they're being asked, what's the training set? And they're like, that's proprietary. We don't want to share that with you. I'm like, okay, but let's for a minute assume that Reddit is correct as it shuts down its API for those sources, that an awful lot of the Reddit universe is populating language models here. The average Reddit user, I feel, and this is my speculation from having used the site occasionally, is not necessarily, without bias, shall we say. Those folks are going to come in with their own perspective. So if we ask ChatGPT, help me talk about the needs of my community for this service, and it goes in and says, well, the 18 to 34-year-old white programmer male audience over here says this is our need, and it pulls us back and we read that and go, oh wow, there's a need out there that I really wasn't thinking about so much in my grant application. I should really examine that and think about how I'm putting it in there, without necessarily thinking to ourselves, where did that assumption come from? Where did ChatGPT draw that was the thing that was the community need that's unmet that we could do from? And we start working with the bias of the data set because it's the question that we're now working on. So I think we always have to be cautious ourselves about our own bias being shifted by the question or the first responses coming back in. And then we start shifting our asking more around what ChatGPT's model wants us to think about than rather us thinking our nonprofit mission is X. We know this about our client base, but the machine is suggesting that this is a more effective way to answer that question. And what if I go down that rabbit hole? So I'm a little concerned there that we're going to get some unconscious bias from their language models introduced into our own writing and thinking by using this tool and throwing those ideas on the table.
There's also been research out there showing that there's significant bias, gender bias according to various racial backgrounds, ethnicities. It could really impact some underserved communities. So my concern really is how the large language models are used and how they predict because remember, this is a predictive program. So some of you missed the first 10 minutes, I know. Really the way a GPT model works, which is generative pre-trained transformer, there's a long word for you. GPT models are the engine that drive a lot of these companies that are putting out their products right now that we're all going to be using, some of which, and they're all predictive. Well, they're predictive on language that's there. And so much of our language assumes things about gender and race that is incorrect. There was I'll just give you a quick example of a research study on ChatGPT 3. We're using version 4 now, but in 3, they showed that when a series of questions were asked about a doctor and a nurse communicating with each other, they changed the sentences each time, and every time the model assumed the nurse was a woman and the doctor was a man. So that kind of bias is really there. Be aware of it. Hopefully it will change over time, but I don't like to rely on hope. I like Melinda French Gates, who just wrote an article and wrote her concerns about needing more women and more people of color in the field of AI to be far more outspoken and also have a say in how these are programmed and how they're trained. I think that's going to be essential.
Wow, that's a very good point. I didn't know about that type of gender and racial bias. That's concerning. Dr. Bev, do you want to share your opinion? I can see that you have shared a lot of interesting insights in the chat, so maybe we can you can discuss as well.
I think we have to be conscious ourselves of how to write gender fluid and be correct, because we never know when we're addressing something to the contact at a potential funder. We really don't know if they're Mr., Mrs., Ms., they, or whatever. So it requires due diligence outside of what's on the screen in front of us. We clearly have to be investigative. We have to look, we have to use, other resources to look up information. The part that I like most about Instrumentl and all the updates, Mia, is that now you can see who the key contact people are. And if they're in LinkedIn, there's a little icon next to their name. And you can click on that and you can determine how they want to be addressed if you reach out to them. That is the most important piece. It's really critical thinking. And can a machine or a group of programmers replace what we innately know? Absolutely not. Not at this point. It's still all what if and experimental, in my opinion.
That's a very good point. Yeah. I think that all those little things are not really little things when it comes to establishing relationships with funders. So we have to be very cautious of how we address the people that we are trying to establish contact with, funders included. Especially when it comes to gender pronouns. Great. So moving on to the next question. Why might AI have the potential to make the grant writing process more equitable? And maybe we can address the next one as well. How can we ensure transparency and trust when using AI in grant writing? Because I think that those two are can be addressed simultaneously, potentially.
Was that question for me?
Yes, of course, if you want to, if you want to kick us off.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Bear, please do.
Transparency and trust come with common sense. And let me give you an example. Somebody has this dream to start their own nonprofit organization. Okay, maybe thousands of somebodies have this dream to start their own nonprofit organization, but they don't know anything about grant writing. So they hear about AI, they stumble on to ChatGPT Pro or another system, and they start putting the questions in that the potential funder is asking, getting the answers, and then copying and pasting that into their online e-grant portal template upload. Okay, that is being naive. It's being a little bit, I guess, blindly entering the field, thinking that they can write a grant proposal using a chat bot and get funding. So that's where I'm concerned. The people who haven't been through training, who aren't members of the Grant Professionals Association, who don't have experience, who don't know, who don't want to hire a grant writer because money is scarce at the beginning of a nonprofit Anybody who thinks that AI is going to be able to write their applications and get them millions of dollars by September, it is a very deep, endless rabbit hole that they're going to fall into. And I call it grant seeking suicide, because they know. They know. They can tell when something hasn't been written correctly to their content, or when it looks like it was generated by, an AI program or service. So with all of that, I see a lot of nonprofits that won't be in business very long if they don't understand the value of the trained human being in this process.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that ChatGPT in this case, but in all use cases across all industries, should be only considered as a brainstorming partner, as a tool for not starting, just not to start from scratch, but never to actually use it as a replacement for a human grant writer or a grant professional, and always take the responses with a grain of salt. So
yeah, I think when you look at the panel here, we have, if you combine our decades of experience, you can't boil that down into a good prompt for AI. As Bev just said, you have to have the sometimes the historical experience of you might get a list of some funders, but unless you know which ones are really still in business and which ones are actually giving for the causes they say and how much they're giving, you don't really know much. I mean, Instrumentl has been a great tool for that, because at least gives us the starting point of knowing more about that funder. I do see a way that AI can, even though it contains biases, I do see a way it can make some processes more equitable. And I'm thinking of a local refugee organization whose leader has, for good reason, it has English as a second language because they themselves are a refugee. And so their writing is not exactly the way someone who grew up speaking English would look like. So in that case, they may be able to put in some key points of what they want to communicate and have ChatGPT or similar program make that written in a way that the foundation is likely to say, this is a well-written application. And so not only that, but it may teach them to write better. So certainly for English as a second language, I think for, various groups in the country, we communicate differently sometimes. And yet, for better or worse, at the moment, people at foundations are used to seeing things come through, communicate a certain way. I wish that wasn't always the case. We could go on about this, but I know some foundations are going to short videos instead of written applications at all, just to really get a feel for an organization, so that you don't have to hire a grant writer and pay a lot of money to be considered. So this is great for new or grassroots nonprofits that maybe don't have the money to afford grant writers. So I think it could level the playing field in a lot of different ways.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of ways to talk about equity in this conversation too, because there's the access to telling your story and writing this stuff out that does take time and money and expertise and experience and whatnot to do well. I think that's absolutely correct. And I'm a little concerned that, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to get flooded with too many applications that aren't, the appropriate ones for those grants. But, when all you have to do is push a few buttons to try and generate 2,000 characters here and 500 words there, more people may choose to do it, making it harder for those emerging equity-based organizations to get their story out in front of the right program officer, the right grant maker, the right donor, whatever it might be. So that concerns me. But I do think that there's an opportunity for organizations that are trying to understand their own bias and their own equity problems to use this tool to enlighten themselves a bit more. Because so much of the data set is based on arguments on the internet, the internet's willing to tell you when you're wrong almost all the time. It's going to have that ability if you ask it. So if I put some language down and say, tell me where this may have some bias in community in the language, where is that showing up in this question, this answer, this whatever, and the opposition information I do find really helpful as a prompt. Tell it when I ask that machine, tell me what I'm missing, tell me what I did wrong, tell me where there's opportunity for another way to think about this. If I don't just say write it, because then it'll write it with the most likely answer, but if I tell it here's an angle, tell me why this angle is wrong. In which way is it wrong, right? What bias am I missing in this language, whatever. Then you may get some prompts to help you eliminate some of your own equity issues in your own writing, your own thinking, and that can be helpful. Again, you're feeding the model, and that I'm a little concerned about, but it does do that part of the thing pretty well.
Yeah, I would say that we are not discussing how AI is flawed in terms of reinforcing biases and whatnot, but I would say that like the problem is even deeper because it's being trained on data coming from people. So it's a higher problem from a philosophical level because it's the people who are biased and people who are actually reinforcing these biases. But yeah, I agree with using it carefully when it comes to the grant writing process. Okay, so we have 15 minutes more, so we can address some of the questions when it comes to the role of grant professionals in AI. And then I will also go through the chat to see the questions that attendees have posted. What would you say can grant writers do to adapt to the rise of AI in their profession? Because I feel like there is somewhat a fear of missing out. AI is all over the news across all industries. So what can grant writers do to preserve their ethics in terms of their profession, but also to make the most of this technology? So maybe Margit, you can share your point of view, and then Dr. Bev and Steve as well, if they have anything to add.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I look at all of these questions, I think really the best thing we can do as professionals, given that AI is on the rise, and actually AI has been around since the 1950s. I mean, even today when we write an email, it's telling us what the next word will be, right? That's predictive technology. But of course, we've jumped just 100-fold now with ChatGPT and OpenAI releasing that program, and with new companies taking advantage of this all the time. So I think the best thing we can do is stay curious. Stay curious and not fearful, because I think if we're here on this webinar, and I know with my fellow panelists, we've been doing this a long time. And we've been doing it without fear, which is why we've had success. And whenever you approach something without fear and with a sense of curiosity, it's going to go well. You're going to learn, you're going to see what's good and what's bad about this technology, what will work for you, what will not. So take the time to learn about it and just practice using it. See what it's really all about. The one thing to remember is I was reading about Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, and even he says, this is not perfect. Don't rely on this to do anything important. So this is the CEO saying this. Yeah. So, take it seriously in terms of what it could mean for our future, but also with a grain of salt in terms of what it's able to do now. So I would say practice. And remember, ChatGPT is good at doing tasks. It's not good at doing a job. That's for us.
That's wonderfully praised, Margit. Yeah, I completely agree. Dr. Bev, do you have anything to add to what Margit said?
Yes, I think everybody that's on our broadcast or who listens to the recording later should go to the Grant Professionals Association website. It's grantprofessionals.org. There is a statement there on ethics that comes from our industry association top of the line leader, and that talks about how, as grant professionals, we must approach the use of AI. It is not, forbidden or anything like that, but we also have to use our common sense, our innate ability to determine when something is wrong and when it's okay. And we can't just take it as the quote, gospel, unquote. We have to investigate whatever we're getting back to determine the legitimacy, the validity, and is it what we want to put into our sentence or our paragraph, or how do we want to use it? Like, let's say we've been having, writing for the same client now for 5 years, and we want to brush up that current boilerplate about their organizational background and capability and give it sort of a fresh new look. Well, even if we copy the old paragraph into ChatGPT and say, freshen up this paragraph, write it differently, give it a more up-to-date perspective, it doesn't mean what we get back is a straight copy, paste, and submit. Yes. We have to have common sense. We have to be investigative, and we have to know, as humans, at least what's left in my lifetime, we're not going to be replaced because we know the difference. We have been out there. We all have experience. The moderators are excellent today. We know the difference in the real and the fake, and we're not going to put the fake into any content that we want to consider or label as ethic and professional.
Very good point. Yeah. So Steve, did you want to say something, or?
I do, but a little related to one of the chat questions that came in that I think is part of this. Claudia asks in here, what would you say to new grant professionals listening to this that don't have the historic experience of those of us on this panel that have been doing this for decades? And those people may be feeling a little demoralized hearing this right now. And I think it is an interesting time to be coming into the grant writing profession to see these tools here and go, wow, am I going to be supplanted by this thing? And it's a real opportunity to take a look at the output of the right prompts. I mean, first of all, I think, what do we do to adapt? We have to become better users of prompts. We have to understand questions to ask, which of course, those of us that have been doing this work for a long time, and especially if we do it as consultants rather than on staff professionals for a single organization, we spend a lot of our time asking really interesting questions to the people we're working for. Why did you structure the program that way? What outcomes do you see coming out of that? And why do you make that assumption? And we give prompts to humans all the time. So I think that's a really interesting part of this. But the newer folks that are maybe coming to the profession right now and seeing this, I think if you can think of yourself as a teacher in a classroom, grading a paper, that just came back to you and going, why would you recommend somebody answer this question differently from how this chatbot just answered it for you? What's the answer to why that should be different from what it is very insightful in how we use this tool to adapt to our work. We may become much more refining editors than we are original creators in the future as these tools get better. They're not quite there today. But I taught grant writing at the college level for a few years, and I found it such a important experience because it made me a much better writer to work with people who were learning how to do it. And if you don't have access to a classroom full of college students that are trying to learn this, but rather you've got a chatbot that's trying to do it better, if you're looking at it and saying, what is it doing wrong that I know could be better? And then I got to go find the answers to make it better, or ask the questions of those program staffers, do the research. Our good friends at scholar.google.com is still a tremendous resource for me to get the real citations, right? Instead of relying on ChatGPT to do it. If I need a citation that really backs up a thought, I'm more likely to go there because, tools like this might make up the citation. It may not be the real thing, and I need to go to the right place.
They do make up citations. You have to be careful of that, at least at this point. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Something that we mentioned in the prompt guide that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar is a useful plugin that you can use if you're using ChatGPT. So there is a Chrome plugin that's called Web GPT that enables you to connect ChatGPT with the internet. So this is how you can bridge that problem of AI hallucinations in terms of false citing, because it draws data from the internet directly into the prompt form. So we have just 5 minutes left. So maybe we can address at least one additional question from the chat. I can see that Everett is asking about suggestions on how to use AI to save on time-consuming admin tasks that can be costly in overhead and not covered by restricted funding. So do any of the panelists have a suggestion on how to use ChatGPT or other AI tools for that?
I would suggest starting with using it for simpler things like generating thank you letters when there's been donations made. You could use it to generate annual appeal letters. You might want to use it for some boilerplate things like developing a needs statement for a project, and you always have to have a needs or a problem statement in every grant application. So you could make a list of some things that you do on a very regular basis that you could develop some templates for, so that it would save you time in the future. For example, that thank you letter could be customized each time, but it's really nice to just get the first one done. Or even a case statement for a new project that you're exploring. Case statements can take a while. So, ask it to help you develop a case statement, and they'll give you a starting point that you could perhaps reuse. I'm not sure if those qualify as some of the boilerplate or administrative tasks you mentioned, but those might be some good starting points.
Great, thank you so much, Margit. I think that's useful. Yeah, for simpler writing tasks, ChatGPT can definitely help, especially when the text that you are expecting to get isn't that long or complex in terms of like having to include some strategic perspective. So we have just 3 minutes left. I will download the questions that we have in the chat, and then organize a way to address them either internally or with the panelists, so that you can get your answers. But I'm sure that a lot of answers will be found in the PDF that we will share, as well as maybe attending the mentioned on-demand webinar that Margit has on her website. So my question for you is, what did you think of today's questions? So I think that we managed to cover a lot, but if you want to share your thoughts in the chat, feel free feel free to do so, because I have a fun fact for you. And all of these questions were generated by ChatGPT. So as you can see, AI has its place in the workflows in grant writing processes and in marketing as well in organizing a webinar such as this one. So if you want to submit your feedback form to get this ChatGPT prompt guide we create specifically for grant professionals, I will share a link within the chat in a second. And yeah, within the deck, you can also learn more about the template library that we launched. So why start from scratch when you can use one of our expert-backed templates? And as a summary, you should use ChatGPT as a brainstorming partner to kick off the writing process. Never copy-paste the responses. So you need to do your due diligence, do fact-checking, and edit the response that ChatGPT generated afterward. And I will share a link to the feedback form just a second here in the chat. So make sure to submit your feedback form, and you will receive the prompt guide to your email. And for the last slide, you can follow up with me by looking up my contact details on Instrumentl. You can sign up for a 14 days free trial, and you can use the following discount codes if you decide to give Instrumentl a try after the free trial. And yeah, for the end, I would like to thank our panelists for taking the time to join this panel and for a very vivid and interesting discussion. So thank you, Dr. Bev, Margit, and Steve. And yeah, I hope that we will organize future panel discussion on a burning topic as well.
Thank you. This was exhilarating.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you for having us here.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. And I hope to see you on the next workshops as well. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.